with the obligatory, this is being recorded for posterity and prosperity. With that, I'm going to introduce Wilson Badillo Sr., who is the Senior Business Banking Relationship Manager with M&T Bank. Wilson, take it away.
Hello and good morning, everyone. As it's been introduced, my name is Wilson Badillo, but I'm Wilson Badillo Jr. I'm with M&T Bank. I'm with M&T Bank, and I'm a business relationship manager. I've been within the industry for 25 years now. 10 of those years working as a business development person with small businesses with revenues up to 40 million in revenues and startups all throughout the DMV area. So today I'd like to share with you some information regarding forgiveness. I'm going to pull up that screen now and share. So as many of you know, earlier this year with the pandemic, the PPP plan was introduced, not to be confused with the PPE, which is a totally different thing. And today we're going to talk about that as an overview as to how you go about doing and getting forgiveness for your business. Hold on a second. So first and foremost, where do you apply for forgiveness? When you originally applied for your PPP loan, you would have done it through your business bank, whoever has your banking relationship. And that is who you will be using also to apply for the forgiveness. At M&T Bank, we have a dedicated portal for our customers to go in and apply for forgiveness. Many of the banks in the industry are doing the same. Some of the smaller banks are doing it manually. If you haven't received any guidance on that, I would suggest reaching out to your branch manager or to your business banker if you have one. Before you do so, a few tips that I have for you is to first visit www.sba.gov. On that site, you'll find the forms for applying for forgiveness, worksheets, and all the information you need to gather to bring to the bank. It's important that you have those calculations and that documentation ready before you start the process, because it'll make things much more smoother and less stressful for you in the long term. Those forms will ask for your SBA PPP number and your lender PPP number. Don't worry about that until you speak to your banker. Your banker will have all that information for you. If you use a third-party payroll provider, reach out to them. They should be familiar with the documents that you'll need, and they'll be able to give you the payroll reports that you'll need to apply for forgiveness. Okay, and last but not least, if you're a business with multiple owners and one of the owners, owner A, applied for the PPP, owner A should also be the owner that's applying for forgiveness. If owner B was to apply, that would cause delays and most likely have the application kicked back to restart or add additional forms, and that will definitely delay your application. Our recommendation is to apply as soon as you can so that the forgiveness can be done. But I would say that definitely speak to your accountant or CPA to seek their guidance on how you should go about it. It'll be very helpful, as every business has a different situation. I would strongly recommend that. So what is the Flexibility Act? The PPP was rolled out fairly quickly. So after that, on June 5th, the president signed into law the Flexibility Act. The law does exactly what it says. The intent of it is to make the PPP program more flexible, giving the business owners more opportunity to qualify for forgiveness. what it covers. A few things that changed. Originally, the PPP was an 8-week period. They enhanced that to 24 weeks. This allows you to be able to qualify again for forgiveness. As you're spreading out the expenses from 8 weeks to 24 weeks, that's triple the time, much more convenient for business owners, for the banks, for everyone, so that we make sure that you get forgiveness if you qualify. The deferment period was originally 6 months, so you had 6 months from the day that you received the funds of deferred interest, and then after that, interest would apply. They changed that to 10 months to give you more time to apply for forgiveness and get qualified. Originally, it was a 75-25 split, where 75% was for payroll and 25% would be for other. And then they changed that to a 60-40, again, giving it more possibility for flexibility for forgiveness. There's also some allowance to delay payroll taxes until December 31st. We're very much close to that timeline. Consult your CPA regarding that. And then there were some employers who reported problems trying to keep their employees or trying to rehire their employees because of different factors, high risk from COVID, the unemployment perk that was added. So with that in mind, they gave business owners the ability to explain any kind of exemption that they want to apply for, and we'll cover that later in the next slide. Originally, owner operators / employees were also capped at 100,000. By moving from 8 weeks to 24 weeks, that allowed the business owner to expense up to a higher amount. In the 8-week case, it was 15,385. In the 24-week, the maximum became 46,154. And then we'll discuss that a little more in detail. So what do you need to know about the SBA loan forgiveness program? As I mentioned earlier, at sba.gov, the website, you'll find the forms to apply. At the date of this slide, there were only 2 forms. Since then, there are now 3 forms. The forms are designed based on your specific business and the amount that you borrowed from the PPP, quote unquote borrowed, because we're looking to get you forgiven. Either way, the borrower, the business owner, has to supply documentation to proof for the loan forgiveness. If you did less than 50,000, I believe it's less documentation that you have to provide, but you still are required to keep the documentation that's needed in record. And that requirement is for 6 years. So whatever you submit to your bank for loan forgiveness, that documentation, you should retain it for 6 years and for auditing purposes. As you know, if they ever come, I'm sure they'll choose some at random and just check it and make sure it's accurate. So you want to make sure that you have that all buttoned up and stored somewhere safe so that you can present it. The loan forgiveness calculations, here it talks about the M&T portal. Even if you're not one of our clients, you can visit our site at mtb.com. And there's plenty of guidance, frequently asked questions, and tools that you can try and use to get yourself where you need to be. So one thing to note is that employee information has to be part of your documentation if it applies, and you'll need the employee's name, last 4 digits of social, and the breakdown of their income. That's part of the documentation requirement. So how does forgiveness work? As I mentioned earlier, there are certain percentages that you have to meet on expenses in order to qualify for forgiveness. The biggest and most obvious one, in my opinion, is the payroll. 60% of the funds have to be used for payroll expenses. That includes healthcare, benefits, state and local taxes, and anything involving payroll. The other 40% would be used for any other qualified expenses. These expenses include business rent and lease agreements, business mortgage interest, and those two, you need to make sure those expenses had to be in place prior to February 15th, 2020. So if you started a new business, or you decided to move into a location after February and you never had a location before, it doesn't qualify. If you were an existing business in an existing location, or if you relocated and there were expenses, consult your CPA for more guidance. Last but not least, business utilities, electricity, gas, transportation, telephone, internet access, everything that you need to do business qualifies. So that is to a maximum of 40% of what you received from the forgiveness that can be expensed and forgiven. What do independent contractors, self-employed individuals, and sole proprietors need to know? So from the time PPP started all the way till now, this is one question that has come up constantly. For the $100,000 cap, an owner-employee is anyone who owns 20% or more of the business and is employed by the business. As mentioned earlier, the cap originally was $15,385, but now the cap has gone up to $20,833 per business. Important to mention the per business part, because in the previous slides, you may have noticed that that the limit was higher, something about 45. So that 45 limit is the aggregate. 20,833 is the per business maximum. Okay. There are some exclusions mentioned here, such as sick leave, and business owners can expense payroll costs for employees, but not themselves, with the exception of W-2 employed business owners. So with that, the documentation requirements are the 1040 Schedule C, Schedule F, demonstrating profitability. If you're a single owner and you didn't show profitability for the last 12 months on the 1040, you don't qualify. But if you did show some income, there's a formula right there. 2.5 of 12 in net profit would be your qualified amount. Important considerations. The loan forgiveness, we talked about that. The time period is a 24-week time period. We touched a little bit on exemptions. So if you had employees that you were trying to bring back on board, but they didn't want to come on board for any reason, that has to be documented. You have to have an offer letter that you offered them, which reflected a same amount of hours, same amount of pay, and then you have to have documentation that they did not want to come back on board, and that also you were unable to find a new employee to replace them. Because some people didn't want to go back to work for health reasons and any other slew of reasons, childcare. There were a lot of challenges personally that a lot of people were going through. But if you face that as a business owner, just make sure that you have the proper documentation to show that happened. And then the December 31st deadline is the deadline to restore your full-time equivalents to salary and wage. There is guidance online as to how you calculate your full-time employee count, because it's a mixture of hours. If you have a part-timer, they're not half an employee technically. So that there are formulas that the SBA has recommended for the employee count. If you have any questions about that, again, I'm a big proponent. Talk to whoever does your taxes, your CPA, to make sure that you have that all buttoned up. Okay, the documents, all for most banks, since it's being electronic, the suggestion is to have all your documentation in PDF format. The PDF should not have passwords on them. If they do have passwords on them, it will end up slowing down your application, and they'll request new ones without password protection. There is a Schedule A worksheet on the SBA site that you have to fill out. It doesn't have to be submitted, but certainly keep it for your records to make sure that you have all your documentation taken care of. The exact documentation will vary by employer, but for example, payroll expenses, you would need your bank statements, canceled checks, or your third-party payroll report. Tax forms, payroll filings, all that stuff for the month time period that is covered. Payment receipts for any employee healthcare, retirement plans, and full-time documentation showing who the job offers that were given and the refusals. If you had to fire an employee for cause, that should also be documented. And if any employees resigned voluntarily, that should also be documented. This way, you don't risk your forgiveness. For the non-payroll expenses, we're looking at mortgage interest. So you would need your statements for your mortgage. With your rents, we would need bank statements, canceled checks, and the same thing applies for business utility payments. Essentially, you are documenting the expenses that are qualifying for your forgiveness. So you should have your bank statements or the relevant statement to the cost and the checks, the copies of the checks, so that this way it shows that it was paid from your business account and from the proceeds. So what happens if your PPP loan isn't forgiven? So if your loan isn't forgiven, or if there's a portion that isn't forgiven, what happens is it gets termed out at 1% for 24 months. This may vary at some other banks, but at M&T Bank, that's what we're doing. I wouldn't be too worried about it, because if it's a substantial amount, you speak to your bank and they will look at fixing the time frame, maybe extending the time frame a little bit, because it's in our best interest that you succeed and continue to operate. And because of the Flexibility Act, we want to make sure that that this PPP was very beneficial to you as a business. Many people will have some portion of the forgiveness perhaps not forgiven, especially if you took the EIDL, the disaster relief loan. There's a stipulation there. Consult your CPA about that if you have that. When you apply, you can apply for the loan by December 31st. If you don't apply by December 31st, you can still apply in the beginning of the year. Don't worry about it. The approval process will take anywhere from 30 to 120 days, if I'm not mistaken. There is no prepayment penalty. So if you did not qualify for full forgiveness, let's say you have a balance of $5,000, you can pay that off right away. You don't have to leave it as a monthly payment. The option is yours. All interest is recalculated from the time that your forgiveness is set. And then if you're not deemed eligible for forgiveness for whatever reason, you would have to repay that to the bank with the terms indicated, the 1% at 24 months. Your bank may vary, so it's important to check in with your branch manager or business relationship manager. All right, so where do you go for information? Feel free to visit mntbank.com to look at our resources for our customers and for non-customers alike. Other than that, seek out your branch manager or business relationship manager to help you. The telephone banking center there is for M&T Bank customers, but I'm sure that your bank, if you don't bank with us, would be able to guide you as well. All right, so that concludes my presentation, and I'll stop sharing and see if anybody has questions. I see some questions here.
Yeah, I asked.
There are questions. They also wanted to know if you would share the presentation. So could you send that to me and I could share it with everybody that's on?
Yeah, sure. I'll send that to you. And you know, my contact information is not there, but please share my contact information. I'm happy to chat with any business owner that needs some guidance. Maybe if it's something I can answer, that'd be great. If it's something I can't answer, I can look it up.
So Bruce wants to know, does everyone need to apply for forgiveness by December 31st, 2020?
No, everyone does not need to apply by then. That's the suggestion, because it all depends on when you were funded. Your interest is deferred for 10 months. So let's say you were funded April 26th. Theoretically, your interest is deferred until February 26th. So you're not getting charged any interest for that time period. However, the earlier you apply, the earlier you get forgiven, the more likely it is that you won't have any interest expense.
Okay. What happens if a business is a brick and mortar and then they go to fully remote? Are they still qualified for forgiveness?
So if you go from brick and mortar to remote, it will depend on a couple of things, right? Are you still paying? So there's a few things that go into that question. If you move to remote, you no longer have leasing expense, right? So you're not leasing that space. So what that means is that you're not going to be able to claim that leasing expense for your forgiveness. However, you're still going to be able to claim your payroll, whatever utilities that you can expense for the business at that point. For that, I would consult your CPA, because I'm not an expert on taxes and all that stuff. Whatever you can claim as business expense for your utilities and, let's say, internet, electricity, etc., as business expense can be used for the forgiveness. So you would qualify for forgiveness. What percentage will be forgiven will all depend on how much of the expenses you can qualify into those buckets.
Got it. And Cliff has a question. He said, he was told to wait to file with Banco, and they said there may be a congressional action, and we don't want to apply before knowing what may change. He said, does that make sense?
Oh yeah, that does make sense, because changes have been coming hard and fast, and a little less hard and fast as we've gone longer down. One of those changes was the forgiveness for $50,000. So at one point, there was so much documentation that they opted to have a $50,000 limit form that made it a little simpler to apply for forgiveness. And that change was maybe a month and a half, 2 months ago. I forget, it gets blurry. So some banks are anticipating additional changes. M&T Bank, we feel that if anything does change, it's going to be to the customer's benefit, and we can adjust from there. But yeah, there's no guarantee that changes can't happen tomorrow. But as far as M&T, we feel like it's gotten to a point where we're comfortable applying for forgiveness.
That's all the questions that were in the chat. Does anybody have any questions?
No, Wilson, thank you. This was very informative. I appreciate it.
I think there's another question Jillian just put in.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, Gillian asked, if I own my building, can part of my mortgage payment be used for forgiveness?
Right. So in that case, if your business is located in the building that you own, the interest on that mortgage is part of the other category. So the 60% is payroll, the 40% is other expenses. Your mortgage interest would qualify as long as you own that building prior to February 15th of this year. And as I mentioned in the presentation, make sure that you have copies of your mortgage statements and canceled checks, and keep that for 6 years as proof.
Fantastic. Anybody else have any questions? Okay. Is there any, do you have any insight? Is there any more federal funding coming down the pipeline at this time?
Nothing concrete. You know, I've heard of a second round of PPP, but that rumor has been around for a very long time. My impression is that everyone's holding their breath until January 21st, when the new administration comes into power. You know, there's a lot of variables with that. You know, what will they do with SBA, PPP? Will it be a second offering? What will they do with taxes? You know, so there's plenty of variables behind that. But with the Flexibility Act, what we do know is that they're making it as easy as possible for businesses to qualify for forgiveness. And our goal is to have everyone forgiven to the maximum amount that they can.
Great. Well, I want to thank you so much for your time and taking the time out of your day for us. And thank you to everybody for coming. And if nobody else has any questions, I think we're good. I'll send on along the flyers and there's a presentation, and have a great day. So.
All right, my pleasure, everyone. Nice to see everyone that I know, and for those that I just met, you know, feel free to reach out when law